Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is Randy Wright, your captain speaking, and as always, I'm joined by my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. This will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while Jeremy and I delve into the pre-flight checklist, because there really is a lot of news and information to get to before we may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I'm sure many of you have been wondering something that both Jeremy and I have wondered, and that's why no other American in the history of the United States has been given an individual holiday unto themselves, other than George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. But even that has gone away, as they have melded that into the holiday that is generic sounding President's Day. But with MLK Jr., there is actually a full holiday that is given to him. And there's some revisionism that has been going on with respect to his message and some of the outlooks that he's had, because there's certainly some questionable things with respect to Mr. King's past that, you know, the politically correct types aren't going to look at. Some of his affiliations belonging to the Communist Party of the United States, his own card-carrying status with that nefarious political organization. And now I know that many will try and say that that's just something that anybody who was fighting for change back in the 50s and 60s would have done, but I'm not so sure of that. And it's interesting because one of the things that Zygmunt Dobbs warned us of is just how some of these nefarious organizations, such as the NAACP, which was founded by W.E.B. Du Bois, had very tenuous relations with the United States as a whole, preaching a lot of anti-Americanism, and also were very active with the communist forces that were being unleashed in the United States, including the campuses where a lot of these civil rights activist leaders were getting their training. And the fact that we have this kind of interrelationship between the civil rights movement and communism is really rather quite troubling, because, as you know, when you look at the natural law tenets that underpin our entire representative Republican system of government, you'll see that equal protection under the law is something that applies to us all. But I think that that message is being hijacked by some of these more radical groups.
Radical groups like Black Lives Matter, the Black Panthers, NAACP, Southern Poverty Law Center, and the list goes on and on and on.
It absolutely does.
You know, I'm thinking, Randy, that a lot of this stuff, and again, we've spoken about propaganda numerous times, and one of the key elements of propaganda is actually being able to, you know, take propaganda and be able to split it as if it's like a two-pronged attack.
Absolutely.
You have their underlying agenda, but then you have kind of a precursor that is kind of like the spearhead of it, you know, and it's just kind of overlaps, and that other, you know, precursor and that overlapping point deals with aligning themselves with individuals, organizations, political bodies that seem to be trying to promote a certain message, for whether it's good or bad.
Right.
In Martin Luther King's situation, in his circumstance, you know, it was with civil rights. Well, we go back and look at the Communist Manifesto. They talked about the civil rights, but they, again, Marx designated one certain group of individuals over everybody else. And that's not to say that Dr. Martin Luther King was doing that with, you know, the black race. And some of the things that he was saying was, you know, you can't rely on certain individuals. You have to be willing to accept responsibility for your own actions. And I think the communist ties that were involved with him were using that as a jump off point to get people more interested and engaged to build a larger following. And then that way they could have the other point of their agenda come in and basically derail it to where it just makes it to where everybody either has to conform and be tolerant, or you're a racist, you're anti-new American, whatever the case is.
And
Bigots.
you know, there's something about that, Jeremy. There really is something to be said about this idea of where they just try to throw the word new in front of every little twisted agenda that they're trying to push forward. We see that quite frequently with the type of language that President Obama uses time and again when he tries to say that, you know, it's a new economy, it's a new age in politics, we're in a post-racial period in our history. Yet when you look at his true policies and what he has actually done, race relations in the United States of America are at a 40-year low. And then one of the things that I noticed that was being put out by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media was that they were trying to sit there and say, now that the Confederate flag has come down over the State House of South Carolina, again, that's a misnomer because it was not actually fluttering over the State House. It was fluttering over a memorial to Confederate war dead. That now they could talk about important things like more funding for education, as if that is really going to fix the race relation problems that we are encountering here in the United States of America today. It's these sorts of intellectually disingenuous messages that are being put out by the radical and extremist fringes of the left that are disconcerting, and it ties into a lot of what we have seen with the type of revisionism that has been tying in to the overall message of Martin Luther King, which should have been good, which originally was touted as good, but we see it kind of, you know, break away from that and go into the message of those like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, which is nothing but a bunch of Marxist diatribe dropped in the laps of the American people and expected to be viewed as some gourmet cuisine that we're supposed to just lap right up.
Well, that's the new civil rights movement is what it is. It's the new civil rights movement. You know, other individuals, well, another individual specifically in history that liked to use the word new was Adolf Hitler. He loved to use the word new. You know, a new Germany. A new fatherland.
He thought of himself as a messianic figure for Germany.
Sure. And that's the way Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, and, you know, a couple of articles that we read, you know, depicts and they're pretty harsh against Martin Luther King Jr. One of them, I seem to recall, paraphrasing, that he wasn't even he was a self-proclaimed reverend, wasn't even a reverend, or this or that. Well, you know, the thing is, there's a lot of individuals in society that rise to become somewhat prominent, whether they're at the local politics level or on a national scale. A lot of individuals like to have the monikers attached to their name, the designations of doctor and reverend, as if it gives them some kind of instant credibility. You know, they'll go through the motions to get the paperwork and the certifications or the sheepskin, whatever the case is. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you are legitimate in what you're doing.
Right.
You know, though that's what's known as being a charlatan. I mean, Al Charlatan Sharpton is notorious for that.
Well, yeah. And the type of things that they go into are just out of the blue. Now, there are some things with Dr. King that really are accepted even by his own institution. that he had done a lot of plagiarism in his doctoral thesis, that he had done a lot of plagiarism while he was at seminary, and that's where a lot of this harshness comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shame that there are those types of questions swirling around it because of the civil rights movement leaders. He really was the one preaching nonviolence. But the question is, where did this idea of using the civil rights movement to create violence come from? And I turn back to Zygmunt Dobbs, the author of Keynes at Harvard, who also wrote a piece on the Red intrigue and race turmoil back in 1958. And he speaks of the Little Rock incident that was happening for integration. And he mentioned that the governor, who was in Arkansas at the time, had actually grown up in the red type system, went to that school in Arkansas, that one that we mentioned during the Fabian Socialist one. And he said that his, views had changed. But here's the thing. There was an article pre-written for Little Rock, actually 4 days before Governor Fabius Faubus took such drastic action as calling forth the National Guard. And this article appeared in the Daily Worker, the other communist papers, and it had things like Arkansas terror and racial violence in Little Rock. It was all presupposed, and basically it was code language to get Marxist-infused groups like the NAACP to appear there and just orchestrate violence. Now, is segregation a good thing? Probably not. Is this idea of saying that there are separate but equal things good? No, that goes against the natural law tenets that underpin our Constitution. But I think what we're seeing with groups like the NAACP is that they're not looking for equality. They're looking for this unequal, very biased approach to getting what they want. And what they want is the utter destruction of our shared Constitution and to replace it with some Fabian socialist nightmare.
Well, in terms of equality of what they want, they don't want the equality that, is mentioned in our founding documents. They don't want the type of equality that is mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. All men are born equal or created equal and endowed unalienable rights by our Creator. They don't understand what that means. And again, this is a new way to understand what equality is. They want this new version of equality that, like you said, is diametrically opposed to the tenets of natural law. Their version of equality is where everybody is equally subjected to their whims. That's what it wants. That's what they want. They want individuals to have everything shared amongst themselves, and they want to be able to control what is shared amongst everybody. I mean, a true communist fashion. That's their version of equality. They want it to be what they define it as, and not what it truly is defined as. Prior to this little indignation that they've got fluttering around in their head, it just doesn't make any sense to them. So because they don't understand it, they have to modify it or change it fundamentally in some cases.
Right. And it's interesting to note that basically what Dobbs was saying that these groups were doing was trying to shine a spotlight on a particular area to spread violence. And we've seen this tactic used again and very recently. Think back to what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. You saw this push by infamous and radical groups like Black Lives Matters shining a light on the Ferguson, Missouri area in an attempt to spark up violence, and of course it did. There was a wave, a rampage of destruction and mayhem and chaos that was just unleashed upon that community, and all because of the whole Freddie Gray case. They don't believe that the justice system works, and that's the thing. I recall that they were interviewing people during that incident, saying that it didn't matter whether he was guilty or not, he should have just been found guilty, he being the officer involved in the case. And that's very problematic. That shows that an outcome was presupposed. That's what they wanted. That's what they were pushing for. And that the whole thing was not about justice. And that's the kind of things that we have to be careful of. We have to know that these radical and extremist organizations are going to obfuscate the truth and to try and peddle a picture that paints their movement in a very positive light, irrespective of what the truth actually is. And that's what we get with the graduate of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the mainstream media. And you know, the salivating mainstream media, everywhere you turn, they are trying to turn these stories, push out these stories to push forward their radical agenda. And that's not what the news media is supposed to be doing.
Well, whether it was with Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Eric Gardner in New York, it really does it. Trayvon Martin, you know, all of those things, all those incidents. Again, we've talked about this before. After the incidents happened, it was within 72 hours that mass chaos erupted. Not so much with Trayvon Martin. There was protests down there, but not to the lengths of those that happened in New York, Baltimore, and Ferguson. And we have to remember one of their mantras, in fact, probably the main mantra that they all bellowed and whooped while they were, you know, dragging their knuckles through the streets and destroying everything in their wake, was no justice, no peace. Now, that could be taken due to it being grammatically incorrect in a number of ways. Number one, it could be construed or interpreted as no justice means there's not going to be any peace. You know, if we don't have justice, how can people have peace? Well, or it could say, you know what, give us justice or we'll make sure that there's no peace. Or without justice, we'll make sure there's no peace, because without justice for us, that's what they want. They want justice for them, as if somebody owes them something.
And yeah, you could see this in the way that they said that trying to say all lives matters is racist. And I remember that coming up after there was that slew of shootings of police officers throughout the country. And that was really a despicable episode in our history. And the fact that these potentates were out there trying to agitate and to go through all of this rancor to tear this country apart at the seams is just a disgusting display of what it was that they were trying to push forward. And so if they were really trying to go forth to the nonviolence type of message that was ultimately preached by MLK, despite his many flaws, then they really weren't doing that. And of course, that was not what they were wanting to do. That was absolutely against what they were trying to do. And what it shows is that these radical groups like Black Lives Matters are just attuned to violence. That is what they wanted. And it's, as you said, it's justice just for themselves, irrespective of what harm it does to society in general or to the population in general. And that's alarming in and of itself.
Well, what it is it's false victimization. They're taking on the role of being the victim, because what they're doing is they're attaching their culture to something that happened to an individual within their culture, and they're taking offense to it as an entire culture. Now, what if let's say we had an Irish community or a German community or a Polish community, a Jewish community. What would have happened if those individuals did this? How would that play out? I'm not advocating for it to happen. I don't want to see innocent people, dead because of tragedies. I mean, we saw that happen with police officers who became targets, like you mentioned, for what? Because they wore a uniform. So one officer who, by the way, folks, was justifiable and proven to be justified in what he did with Michael Brown. It was proven. Ballistics, forensics, and investigations proved he was justified. Because the person was defending himself, another criminal was killed, which happens all the time, not only in this country, but throughout the entire world. You wanted to take that and prop it up. So with the whole police officers being targeted, why were they targeted? Because, well, they were of the same community or background as one individual who committed a crime in their eyes. This is where the hashtag Blue Lives Matter came from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Referring to the police officers. Now, I wouldn't put it past these Neanderthalic troglodytes like Black Lives Matters or the Black Panthers, and again, the new Black Panthers.
Because adding new just makes it better.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past them to say, well, that Blue Lives Matter hashtag, that's racist against Smurfs. I mean, that would be the extent of their intellect. And we have to remember another thing. If they don't want violence and they're doing this to oppose certain types of violence, why is it that Michael Brown's father figure in his life, as soon as it came down from a grand jury that Officer Darren Wilson was not going to be...
He was up on a car.
He was standing up on a car and he started yelling, "Burn this MFer down. Burn it down." Now, if you're sitting and one day you're saying this is a tragedy, this violence needs to stop, and then you advocate and you incite arson, which is a felony. Mm-hmm. You're sitting there inciting criminal activity. That is a felony. That doesn't really get your point across. See, when you individuals do that kind of stuff, nobody takes you seriously. You have no credibility.
It absolutely hurts their cause. It absolutely hurts their cause.
You're laughing stock.
And, the other thing that it does is that it shows that when they go out and look and point the finger at black police officers that are working, they always use that moniker of an Uncle Tom. It's a derogatory term, even though Uncle Tom's Cabin didn't actually work around the way that they're trying to say it does. They're trying to say that that's somebody who just is in bed with the white organization and is, working for their table scraps to keep the other blacks down. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. They have had ample opportunity to fix the problems that have existed with their community. It's just that you have these rabid, frothing at the mouth, extremist, utopian socialists, these Fabian socialists that don't want them to improve. Because if they improve, that means that the steady tide towards socialism is absolutely opposed, and that works against the message that they want to churn forth. And of course, what matters to these Fabian socialists and those that mire themselves in the code language of Keynesian economics and the like, the only thing that matters is their mission. No matter what the truth shows, no matter what the facts on the ground say, it's always best to strictly adhere to their mission, which is absolutely, totally, wholly, diametrically opposed to the natural law values that underpin our Constitution. And, that's why they are so lividly angry with the Constitution. It's why they hate our system. It's why Barack Hussein Obama got in front of the cameras of the salivating mainstream media and said that racism is part of the DNA of the United States and can never be cured. It's all about his Fabian socialist vision.
It's chaotic.
Oh,
That's what
absolutely
it
is.
breeds chaos, because see, their whole agenda is nothing but to breed chaos. That's what their agenda, what they want people to think their agenda is, oh, we need justice, we need equality, no. Guess what? You already have that. There is nothing in this country that does not afford one person over the other any different level of rights. Why? Because if you are an American citizen, you share the same rights under the Constitution as myself and Randy and everybody else who is a United States citizen.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have what's known as the Equal Protection Clause in the Constitution.
Right. And, going back to what Dobbs had to say about the NAACP in this red intrigue and race turmoil from 1958, he said, among top leaders of the NAACP are some who have been prominently active in movements connected with the Soviet intrigue in America over the last 35 years. And he points to some examples are Eleanor Roosevelt with 57 listed communist associations and affiliations of communist fronts, Bishop Edward L. Parsons, an Episcopal priest with 108 extreme left affiliations, then Van Wyck Brooks, who was an author with 57 radical left-wing affiliations, Reverend Henry Hitt Crane, who is a Methodist, 51 radical affiliations, and Bishop G. Brumley Oxman, Methodist, also 41 leftist extremist affiliations. He said such a heavy concentration of pro-Soviet elements is rarely ever found even in organizations which have been cited as subversive by governmental agencies. Experience has shown that whenever numerous pro-communist elements appear in the leadership of an organization, it is not an accidental occurrence, but the result of the specific direction on the part of the red apparatus. That's amazing.
That's beyond amazing. I mean, it speaks directly to what we're talking about here, as far as propaganda being used as a double-edged sword or a two-pronged attack against things that initially are perceived to be good, wholesome, and knowledgeable, noble causes, and then being spearheaded by a bunch of Fabianism.
Yeah, and it gets worse, Jeremy. He said the extent of pro-communist influence in the NAACP can be more clearly understood when the fact is brought out that in most circumstances, less than 10% of pro-communist elements are needed to control an organization. In the case of the NAACP, over 80% of the national officers have well-defined records of pro-communist association. With such a heavy concentration of left-wingers, the Soviet apparatus should have no difficulty in shaping NAACP policy. That's staggering.
I'm searching here for an article. I actually had an article where Jesse Jackson, by the way, was in my town, Flint, Michigan, over the weekend due to this water crisis that we have here. By the way, the President of the United States declared it a federal state of emergency. FEMA's showed up, and Hillary Clinton, I guess, even spoke about it at the Democratic debates yesterday. So, Jesse Jackson actually said, let's put the tape around the city of Flint because it's a crime scene. Well, why is it a crime scene? Well, a few days ago, he alluded to the fact that, this water crisis problem isn't because of the water and the way it is. It's
Because of racism.
It's because of other things, the high crime. It's because of, you know, the poverty. It's because of the demographics here aren't equally laid out. You know, give me a flippin' break. First of all, you're not even from here. I've lived here for almost 18 years. You know what? I've seen things that are more detrimental to society than Jesse Jackson could ever even possibly dream up.
Of course.
He has no idea. This is what really chafes me, is individuals coming into a place where they have no idea what goes on. They open their flappy mouths because of what? He thinks he has some kind of social stature to where he can come in and do this? No, guess what? Go away. You're adding fuel to the fire. That's all you're doing. You are inciting this community to rise up and do something that is extreme and out of the norm.
Yeah. And it just goes to show that this is nothing new. We have seen this type of agenda before, going back to the 50s, going back to the first Red Scare, folks. When you go back to 1919 and 1920, when there really were these attempts to unleash orchestrated attacks against the representative Republican system of government that we have in the United States of America, there really was a lot of fear and trepidation that was stirred up by these subversive elements, as Dobbs put it. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to infiltrate these organizations or create organizations that had a veneer of respectability with them, just straight out of the Fabian model, in order to push their agenda further and further along the road. Unfortunately, they have done a very good job at subverting the United States. We see that they have entrenched themselves in the very foundations of society, and they're working away at every given and available opportunity to weaken the structure of the country and to replace it with all of these detrimental Fabian socialist type things. And we see it in education. We see it in the way that they're now even trying to label things like Darth Vader in the Star Wars saga as being a racist point of view. It makes absolutely no sense, but it just goes to show that these people will spin, obfuscate, and do whatever they can to push their agenda, no matter how radical it is, because they think that they still have the veneer of respectability about themselves. But I honestly do believe that that veneer has started to crack, peel, and crumble.
Who was it that made that?
I don't remember her name.
I think it was Melissa Harris Perry.
Something like that.
I think that's who it was that said that. You know, Mrs. Swinging Tampon Earrings herself. And come on, give me people like that should just, you know, I don't know, be ball gagged.
Yeah.
And I found the article I was referring to.
Okay.
It's actually dated for 2 days ago, and
okay.
Our newly elected mayor, Karen Weaver, held a press conference and whatnot in the lobby of City Hall, and she was flanked by Jesse Pugmug-Face Jackson to her left. Not surprisingly, he refuses to stand on the right of anything. When he spoke, he says, and I quote, "The issue of water and air and housing and education and violence are all combined." Really?
And who combined them?
Really? Well, he did, of course.
Of course.
Now, why is it that, first of all, we don't have an air problem here? We don't have smog. We don't have an air problem here at all. The housing problem is because of dilapidation and people actually vacating from the city because of, you know, unemployment here. They can't sustain
high taxes. I'm sure too.
Unemployment, high taxes. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, the city actually being run by crooks, with, you know, 3 of the city council members were had felony records, which is still amazing to me how they could even hold any office of trust at any level.
Yeah.
The educational system, well, you know what the problem is there? Common Core.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Common Core. It's infiltrated here. I've seen it with my own eyes.
Well, it's infiltrated nationwide.
Sure.
And, that's the nefarious thing about it. It is all designed to strip our students away of actual intelligence, of learning the truth. And that's particularly why we reference the type of revisionism that we're seeing with MLK and indeed with the Civil War and all of American history, because this is all by design to dumb down our students, to take away this true understanding of our fundamental and unalienable rights, because if the students don't know about it, it makes them much more easily manipulated. It makes it easier for the government to try and redefine who we are as a people and what our system of government is. That's why you've also seen even supposedly very well-educated people refer to the United States as a democracy, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. We are a representative republic with democratic elections. We are not a direct democracy, and we are not a democracy in any form or fashion. In fact, our founding fathers were diametrically opposed to us being a true democracy.
Well, with this article, with what Pugmug Jackson said, the issue of water and air and housing and education and violence are all combined. No, they're not. Because, see, the issue with the water was a direct result of the actions and the choice and decision made by our city council to take us off of one water system and put us onto another one. When they did that, they had to have chemical treatments of the water in order for it to be viable and drinkable. They used those chemicals, and those chemicals actually eroded away the lining in our delivery pipes, which exposed the lead. It wasn't, violence that caused it. It wasn't the dilapidation of houses. It wasn't the air problem that we supposedly have. It was governmental corruption is what it was. Why? Because, we're already so far in the negative on the books that we have to do something in order to regain the money. So if we have our own water system, that means that we could charge whatever we want. We can hike the rates up, which they did. And they're poisoning us due to high levels of lead and TTHMs that people are getting sick. And these people are getting sick. But here's Pugmug exacerbating the situation. Again, this is the communist agenda. You're taking one issue that's a legitimate issue and you're blowing it out of proportion to try and make people think that it's a bigger problem than what it is. It's not. Now we have individuals that have filed petitions to have our governor recalled because they're blaming him for this. They're blaming the state of Michigan entirely for this. There's lawsuits filed against the governor and against the state and against the city. Those ones are actually legitimate. The ones against the city, that is.
Yeah.
But they're going after Governor Snyder. Now, I'm not a big fan of Governor Snyder at all. I don't agree with many of the things that he's done. I'm sure he has his reasons. I just don't find them to be valid.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you're attacking a man who was kind of put into a situation where he was damned if he did or damned if he didn't. And now he's going to be, thrown out to the wolves for what? Because people like Pugmug want to make an example out of somebody, all to bolster their own image while they stand on the left of people.
Of course.
Stay out of my town.
Yeah. And
I don't want
what it comes down to is that these left-wingers are going to try and inject race into every issue, even when it has nothing to do with an issue. You know, you look at those of us that don't want to see all of these Syrian refugees dumped into our borders because of the great amount of threat that poses. Because after all, if you look back to the Paris massacres, that was orchestrated and carried out by a bunch of so-called refugees. The Boston Marathon bombing in 2013 here by the Chechnyan Mario brothers, that was carried out by so-called refugees, but already you have the extremist fringes of the left trying to say that this is just people being racist. And, you know, we've come out and said that Donald Trump is not that great of a guy, but he's not wrong in saying that there should be a temporary moratorium on Islamic immigration.
Look at what's happening in Germany right now as we speak. These Syrian refugees are doing nothing but going and raping and killing women. Now, Republicans and conservatives, anybody that doesn't agree with us, they're the ones creating the war on women. Really? Let's see. We have innocent women over in Germany that are being raped and murdered by the same individuals that you want to bring here. Yeah. If that is not a war on women, I don't know what is.
Well, and then think about the response that has been put out by some of the left-wing politicians in Germany, saying that the women just have to basically modify their behavior to
and their appearance.
Yeah, and their appearance to not open themselves up to rape. Isn't that a war on women?
What do they suggest? The women just, as soon as they put their clothing on, start wetting themselves, because that will turn off a rapist. All you have to do is just wet your pants, urinate on yourself, and the rapist will be turned off and won't want to rape you. They really have no idea. These archaic creatures that are doing this to those women. And guess what, folks? The women that I speak of over there, the vast majority of those that are being raped are under the age of 18. Between the ages of, we'll say between the ages of 13 and 25, just for numbers' sake. They're younger women. Now, you want that here? Let's see. United States has a larger population than Germany does. Mm-hmm. We're outnumbered as far as male to female. Males are outnumbered by the females. That is a recipe for disaster to have these individuals come here. And we've already had cases here in the United States where elderly women have been raped and killed by illegal aliens.
Yeah.
Some of which have been Muslim.
And yet you're not going to hear anything from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, because they don't care. They want to push forward this agenda. It reminds me of what they were saying back during the Christmas holiday, when they were trying to say that, Jesus was a refugee, and therefore we all like Jesus when it pushes forward our agenda, and therefore we should be more like Jesus and accept these refugees. Although I don't think Jesus would have ever accepted a rapist that was non-repentant. That's the problem. These people aren't repentant. They're not going to change their views. In fact, they're going to demand that our society bow down to them and change our views, which it ain't going to happen, folks.
Well, here's another fact. Jesus was a newborn child. He was a child. Number two, they fled King Herod, who made an order and decree to kill newborn children. What are these refugees, supposed refugees, these migrants, these Neanderthalic archaic beasts, what are they running from? What are they running from? Honestly, nothing. They have no reason to leave their homeland,
right? Because
it's they want to, and this is, again, this points right to this whole new equality of everything. Well, they shouldn't have to live in those kinds of conditions. Then they need to do something about it. If they don't want a bunch of radical extremists, of which many of these so-called refugees are, if they don't want that in their country, do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see American citizens fleeing, the United States because of, the regime that we have now, because of our rights being violated. No. Why? Because we're standing up and defending our rights. Why? Because that is in our nature. That is what our core principles taught us. It is ingrained in us. Why? Because we have respect for ourselves.
Right.
We value our life.
Now,
These individuals don't even value their own life. That is why they're so adamant and so posthumous about taking the lives of other people.
And it's interesting. One of the things that we see from Zygmunt Dobbs is he's speaking about the NAACP. He says ever since the formation of it, basically 50 years ago, the white domination of that organization had never ceased. It's not so strong now, but back then it really was. And it was controlled by whites, pushing the black community towards a very left-wing ideology and agenda. What are we seeing with the Democrat Party today that's claiming to champion the racial issue, the gender inequality issue, all of these so-called civil rights issues? Why, it's a bunch of old white people that are pushing forward all of this divisiveness. And that's a major problem. And it just reflects that things really haven't changed in the almost 60 years since Dobbs put this book out.
Well, you mean the old white people that are involved in the Democratic Communist Fascist Party, like Lyndon Baines Johnson, who before he became president due to the assassination of JFK, was vehemently opposed to civil rights legislation that was started in 1957 and was against it, voted against it, did everything he could to make sure that it never passed legislation and got to the president's desk. But then when he becomes president, one of the first actions he does is sign it into law. Why is that? That's something that has always perplexed me until I figured it out. And it wasn't until I heard or read what he was quoted as saying that I figured it out. And this is a direct quote from Lyndon Baines Johnson, of which he said on Air Force One in front of 2 state governors. And I quote, "When I'm done with this, I'll have those niggers voting Democrat for the next 200 years. He opposed everything that Martin Luther King Jr. was speaking about in terms of civil equality with the cases of Brown versus Board of Education, so on and so forth. Rosa Parks, the whole 9 yards. He was completely opposed against it until he was the one that had the power of the pen, and then he supported it. He comes swooping in like a knight in shining armor and came to the rescue. And he used it and bolstered it up and kept building the tension, and then he squashed it all with the stroke of a pen. And he became the hero.
Of course.
And Martin Luther King Jr. was there when he signed that into law. He was there.
Basically being used as a political pawn. And it goes back to what Dobbs was speaking about, how it was basically these nefarious whites that were trying to use that as a political apparatus by which to push their agenda forward. And their agenda had nothing to do with equality. It had nothing to do with justice. It had everything to do with spreading the power of the radical and extreme fringes of the left in this country. And that truly is very despicable when you stop and think about it, because what they were doing was trying to rob these people of their freedom. If you look at the natural law tenets that we have, that is what should be the basis of all of this. But that's not what we're seeing with these nefarious organizations. We just see that they double down on these attempts to push forward these radical, extremist, Fabian, utopian, socialist agendas, irrespective of the harm that it causes the country and the community.
Well, let's go back to some statistics, demographics and statistics back in the 40s and 50s. You had individuals, African-American families, they were more of a family unit. There was a lower divorce rate amongst them than there was with white families back then. The divorce rate amongst white families was extravagant. Now, what do we see in the communities? You have individuals that are dependent upon government assistance. And this isn't just, in the black community. This is the white community as well. It's outreached that far to where it's, and again, the whole design of that was to encompass everybody, to get everybody, knock everybody down at one level. Okay? But you see more and more individuals on welfare that are non-whites. You see more and more households, and these are the real demographics. You can look this up in the census data for the past 50 years. You can look at every centennial census for the past 50 years, and these demographics will show an increasing number of black communities being single parents with multiple children, going on and on, a higher divorce rate, a higher crime rate, and it's transformed from the 40s and 50s where there was white families had a higher divorce rate, there was a higher crime rate amongst whites than there was blacks. What happened? What happened?
Well, they were targeted by these Marxist type philosophers. You have to remember,
bring everybody down to the same level.
When you look at what Marx said, Marx viewed marriage as legalized prostitution. He hated the idea of a fundamental building block of society being the family. Therefore, he did everything within his power to target the family, to push forward with the absolute destruction of society. And that is why we see that these Fabian socialist types do not believe in the natural law tenets that underpin our representative Republican form of government. They absolutely loathe and despise it because they believe that the government should be the arbiter of all power, the arbiter of joy. I mean, they literally worship at the altar of the almighty government. They are statists through and through, and there's no debating that. That's exactly who they are. That's what they advocate, and they aren't slowing on that whatsoever. And let's look at another Fabian socialist that had very strong Marxist leanings, and her organization, which is still with us today. Let's talk about Margaret Sanger. If you want to talk about somebody that was a racist, somebody that wanted to destroy the black community and led to the breakup of the black family, I think she was instrumental in causing that. And her organization is, of course, Planned Parenthood.
Yes. Well, folks, do any of you realize what the largest cause of death of African Americans are today? It's not black on black violence. It's not black individuals being shot by police officers. It has nothing to do with firearms whatsoever. It's abortion. Abortion. There have been over 70 million unborn black children, innocent children, that have died by the hands of murderous medical posers.
Yep, and you're not going to hear the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media mention this. And the reason they're not going to mention this is they're in bed with the twisted agenda of Planned Parenthood. It is shocking. It is horrifying. And when you learn the truth of it, you see that there was nothing noble about the original mission of Planned Parenthood. And folks, don't kid yourself, Planned Parenthood has done nothing to separate itself from its dark, twisted, wicked, and evil past. Absolutely nothing.
Well, here's a couple of quotes from Margaret Sanger. She was a real piece of work.
That's putting it lightly.
She says, our objective is unlimited sexual gratification without the burden of unwanted children. Women must have the right to live, to love, to be lazy, to be an unmarried mother, to create, to destroy. The marriage bed is the most degenerative influence in the social order. The most merciful thing that a family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. That is written by, or an article from The Woman Rebel. Volume 1, number 1, reprinted in Woman and the New Race. There we go with the New Race in New York. Again, one of the oldest, bastardizations of the word new, because it just brought so many good, conservative values with that.
Yes, but they attacked Ted Cruz.
Sure. Here's another one. We should hire 3 or 4 colored ministers, preferably with social service backgrounds. Al Sharpton, Louis Farrakhan, Jesse Jackson. And with engaging personalities. The most successful educational approach to the Negro is through a religious appeal. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who could straighten out that idea if it occurs to any of their more rebellious members.
You see, folks, why doesn't the media cover this? Why is this not thrust out into the forefront? If we are seriously concerned with race relations in America, why are we not targeting an organization that, by the admission of its very founder, is out to destroy a certain group, to lie to that racial group, and to work towards its utter eradication? You see, folks, you can't just sweep this stuff under the rug. The history is there. And it's the same type of history that we've seen attempt to hijack and then bastardize the message of Martin Luther King. It's the same type of message that we've seen to be used to keep the blacks on the Democrat plantation, for lack of a better term, because that is absolutely the way that the Democrat Party is acting. The Democrats never changed their stripes, folks. They're the same people that they've been for, 170 years?
She goes on. These quotes, it says, she says, our failure to segregate morons who are increasing and multiplying demonstrates our foolhardy and extravagant sentimentalism. Philanthropists encourage the healthier and more normal sections of the world to shoulder the burden of unthinking and indiscriminate
euthanasia.
Yeah,
it's
of
that
others.
A cute argument.
Sure. Which brings with it, as I think the reader must agree, a dead weight of human waste. Instead of decreasing and aiming to eliminate the stocks that are most detrimental to the future of the race in the world, it tends to render them to a menacing degree dominant. We are praying for and even submitting to the dictates of an ever-increasing, unceasingly spawning class of human beings who never should have been born at all. Now, here's the thing. When she talks about this, and she says this, she says, segregate morons who are increasing and multiplying. Again, I'm going back to the populations to where there is an increase of population that are dumbed down, become dependent on the government, vote Democratic. They've become lazy, which Margaret Sanger suggests she should do. We have all of these welfare mothers that don't work, don't do anything, but they sit at home and they increase their household size by whoever will bed down with them. Those are the people that she's talking about. She This is all done by design. This is part of the Fabian dream, to
Mhm.
have a society to where everybody can be controlled. And then once you reach that point, you say, well, that was fun. And you hit the reset button and you start over.
Right. And, what this also goes to, Jeremy, is a point that Zygmunt Dobbs made. He said, it is very important to communists that the NAACP assume a proper, respectable cover as a non-communist organization. Great pains have been taken to adorn NAACP resolutions with wrist-slapping phrases against communism. The latest resolution, and this is the NAACP report from 1957, and he quotes it, as in the past, the association will employ every reasonable measure in keeping with the democratic or organizational principles to prevent the endorsers, the supporters, and defenders of the communist conspiracy from joining or participating in any way in the work of the NAACP. But as you can see, the democratic or organizational principles, what they're speaking of, and he goes on to say, the ironic fact is that these resolutions are authored by a leadership which has a record of communistic associations involving over 80% of its own top body. So there you have it, folks. They lied back then, they lie now, and that is what we're seeing. And, it's why I have to be wary when I see Donald Trump's association with Hillary Clinton, his past statements, and yet he says something entirely different now. He's falling in line with this, folks. And, you just have to be very careful. I know it's not popular for me to say this, but it is true. You have to watch these people that have not been steady or consistent in their political views all the way through.
Mm-hmm. And now, see, and here's the thing. Getting back to Martin Luther King, do you know that Martin Luther King was actually offered the Margaret Sanger Award? And his wife is the one that actually stood there and accepted it on his behalf.
Yeah.
In 1966. 1966. He was given the Margaret Sanger Award. Now, if that is not ironic and just cosmically, I don't know. That doesn't make sense. How could that possibly be? And do you know who else admonishes Margaret Sanger? Hillary Clinton. She lauds Margaret Sanger as one of the greatest women in history for the advancement of women's studies.
It's beyond belief.
It's very disturbing. Here we have a man who is making an attempt to educate people with his nonviolent marches, his peaceful marches and whatnot. And there have been instances to where he has, become violent, so on and so forth. But, to a degree that could be understandable.
Mm-hmm. and what it goes to show also is that groups like Black Lives Matters, this activist group, I'm reading from a town hall article. It says, at a recent event for female bloggers, Black Lives Matters leaders had a crowd of thousands repeating lines from a letter written by Shakur that include an explicit reference to the Communist Manifesto. Asata Shakur, who has been living in exile in Cuba for over 30 years, is a hero to communist revolutionaries for her involvement in the 1960s and 70s with a violent criminal Black Panther Party offshoot called the Black Liberation Army. Shakur and the group robbed several banks as a revolutionary act and eventually killed a New Jersey state trooper with his own gun after a highway stop in 1973. That is the type of people we're dealing with, folks. We're not making this stuff up. We absolutely are not.
I have one more Margaret Sanger quote for everybody. This is actually in a publication called Birth Control Facts and Responsibilities from 1925.
Wow.
She says, birth control is not merely an individual problem. It is not merely a national question. It concerns the whole wide world, the ultimate destiny of the human race. Hordes of people are born who live, yet who have done absolutely nothing to advance the race one iota. Their lives are hopeless repetitions. Such human weeds clog up the path, drain up the energies and the resources of this little earth. We must clear the way for a better world. We must cultivate our garden.
Yeah. And you know what? To add fuel to the fire, you know that worthless filmmaker Quentin Tarantino, when he
Yeah.
made those anti-police officer remarks, he was doing this at a communist program.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing it at a communist get together that was being done in unison with the Black Lives Matters organizations. Folks, why is it that this sort of information is just not being exposed by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media? And the answer is that these people are already frothing at the mouth to push forward their radical and twisted left wing extremist agenda. And their whole agenda is nothing but trying to destroy the United States of America from its very foundations. They loathe and despise our fundamental and unalienable rights. And again, this is why Jeremy and I say it is absolutely critical and imperative that we all have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution and thereby our fundamental and unalienable rights. It allows us to spot these people for what they really are and to stand up to them and say the most powerful two-letter word in the English language that is recognized by so many other different language groups throughout the world, and that is no.
No, no,
Yeah.
no, no.
No, and stop it. Those are phrases that need to be used against these groups and organizations that are just going out of their way to create violence, chaos, and carnage throughout the United States. And why? Because they want to push forward a radical and twisted agenda. That's it, folks. That's what they want to do.
It's just, it's amazing. It really is. And a lot of people would say, well, what's amazing about it? Again, the dumbing down and the revisionism of our intellect. It's not just our education, it's our intellect, it's our knowledge.
Yeah.
Because knowledge is power. They don't want us to have knowledge. This is why individuals like Margaret Sanger, Snaggletooth Sanger, are not talked about. They don't want people to know that individuals like this of a decrepit and evil mind existed. So they don't talk about it. And the longer they don't talk about it, see, this is revisionism and indoctrination go hand in hand, and it's easy to persuade the masses to believe something. It's easy, but it's time consuming. Okay, within 100 years, no, let's say within 50 years, if you take a population of individuals, okay, and you take those children within that population and you start teaching them certain things that you want them to know while leaving out important events in history or important characters in history, if you don't tell them about them, will some of them know about it? Yes, because it's human nature for people to dig and to go deeper into stuff and to research. But over the years, the more you push your agenda and leave out the truth, the agenda ultimately becomes the truth. Therefore, any truth is washed away, long gone, never to be revealed again. It's already happened. We did our show on Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't taught to Randy and I in school that Abraham Lincoln, in grade school, well, we were taught that he freed the slaves. No, he didn't.
Yeah, nothing could be further from the truth. And,
And
you know, it goes to it's a double pronged approach here, Jeremy.
exactly.
They try and teach that the founding fathers were a bunch of racist, sexist homophobes that were just trying to keep people down. And then they teach that people like Margaret Sanger and people like Leon Trotsky and Vladimir Ilyich
Edward
Lenin,
Bernays, Sigmund
Yeah.
Freud.
all of those guys were good, but they weren't. Or that John Maynard Keynes was good. Again, all of these people were adherents to either communism, Fabian
H.G.
socialism.
Wells.
Yeah. You had all of these radical left-wing movements, and these radical left-wing ideologues are now buoyed up as some sort of champions of the common man. But if you ever look, none of them were really from the common man. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin was the son of a wealthy government employee in Tsarist Russia. He went on to become a wealthy attorney. Trotsky came from a wealthy family. All of these radical extremist left-wing ideologues that claim to be champions for the poor came from rich households. Take a look at Fidel Castro. He was a lawyer, a rich lawyer. Look at Che Guevara. He was a medical student that came from a wealthy family. Why is it that all of these radical, twisted, extremist left-wing ideologues and supporters of communism or Fabian socialism, why is it that they always come from the upper crust? Because those are the only people that have the time to worry about that. Those are the only people that think it would be fun to subvert something.
And then when you have individuals like Martin Luther King Jr. that want to put forth a message, you know, in his I Have a Dream speech, he talked about drinking from the poisonous cup. And a lot of people would say, you know, and that's actually been construed, believe it or not, and morphed into, you know, and slangified, if you will, of drinking the Kool-Aid. You know, it's been that bastardized. What he was talking about is don't drink from the poisonous cup. Don't fall into the trap of individuals telling you that you cannot be successful, that you don't have the authority to take control of your own life and make something of it.
Right.
Don't allow these people to keep you down. And that's what he's saying. And these activists, these Neanderthalic, knuckle-dragging, archaic troglodytes, like Black Lives Matter, and folks, I know people are going to say, oh, that's racist. No, it's not. I'm speaking the truth because they are dumbed down, they are ignorant, they have a one-track mind, and their whole purpose in life that they've been told is to spread chaos.
Yeah.
Those individuals want to take what he said about don't let people tell you can't do what you do, and that's it. They forget everything else that he said. They focus on that one point that he makes, and they perpetuate it and spin it out of control, like, you know, like a top.
You know, let's take a look at the imagery. If you've ever seen the Black Lives Matters poster, it shows a guy in a hoodie holding up a fist, you know, the old communist Black Power salute, holding a dandelion with leaves coming off of it. And what's so fascinating is they try and tell us that this was a spontaneous group, but it's not. It has very leftist origins.
They're rooted in CPUSA.
Oh, yes, of course they are. It was launched in 2013 with the Twitter hashtag with Black Lives Matters after neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman was acquitted in the Trayvon Martin killing. And the radical left-wing activists with communist ties who created it were Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. And they claim credit for the slogan and hashtag. Following the Michael Brown shooting back in August of 2014, the you have Dream Defenders, an organization led by Working Families Party, which is formerly known as Acorn activist, and Occupy Wall Street anarchist Nalini Stamp, who popularized the inaccurate phrase, hands up, don't shoot. See,
Dream
again.
Defenders. That's a takeoff of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream.
Absolutely.
You see how it's all coming together and how they're taking, again, proving our point that they're taking specific nuances.
It gets better. It gets better. Garza, Colors, and Tomiti all worked for front groups of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, or FRSO, one of the 4 largest radical left organizations in the country. The others are the Communist Party USA, CPUSA, Democratic Socialist of America, DSA, and the Committees of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism, or CCDS. Nalini Stamp's Acorn, now rebranded under a variety of different names, works with all 4 organizations, and Dream Defenders is backed by the Service Employee International Union, SEIU, the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the NAACP. And FRSO, that is the other Freedom Road Socialist organization, is a hereditary descendant of the new communist movement, which was inspired by Mao Zedong and many communist revolutions throughout the world in the 1960s and 70s. Folks, there you have it. There you have it. We were warned by Zygmunt Dobbs in 1958, and here we are in 2016, 58 years later?
Yeah.
Some 58 years later, we're seeing the same damn thing.
Because we are repeating history.
Because we have failed to learn the lessons of it.
That's right.
And, you have to go back to the foreword by Archibald Roosevelt, which was just incredible in this book. He says that, and I've got to go down and find it, but he says, on the political front, the communists have used all the prominent figures they could get a hold of, and they have managed to start with the president and vice president and work down and persuaded them to insist that all races must be forced to accept a social and educational front by force of arms. They say, most paradoxically, that the democracy and liberalism requires this. Then he speaks as to favoring progress and reform in social institution and to the fullest practicable liberty of individual action. He said, yet nothing could be further from the case. That's exactly right, folks. What we see with organizations like Black Lives Matters is that they want to use the specter and threat of force in order to push through their twisted and radical ideology, irrespective of the harm that it is going to cause to society as a whole. And the fact that we had Zygmunt Dobbs and Archibald Roosevelt warning us of this 58 years ago is just staggering. It's staggering because it shows that society didn't pay attention. And when society doesn't pay attention to this and we blither and blunder our way into it, we are just exposing ourselves to even greater risk. And I would say that they are more nefarious and duplicitous now than ever.
Oh, they're more blatant and right out in the open with it. Mm-hmm. I mean, Baltimore, Ferguson, New York, those are prime examples of their blatancy, putting it right on public display. They're not sitting behind closed doors anymore, talking about it and having indiscriminate random acts occur. They are taking it right to the front. Yeah. They want this. Why? Because they feel that at this point in time in history, that enough of the American people have become too complacent, too dumbed down, too stupid to realize what the hell is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to keep enforcing it. We had, the Black Panther Party back in the 60s. Now we have the new Black Panther Party, where you have King Shabazz. They were, during the whole Ferguson thing, the new Black Panther Party actually came out and made a statement that, and even at in regards to Trayvon Martin, that incident, they made a statement. It's time to start hanging crackers from a tree. Well, guess what? This goes out to the new Black Panther Party. Okay, I'm going to buy boxes of saltines, Ritz crackers, oyster crackers, any kind of cracker that I can buy, and I'm going to hang them in my tree. And the second you even mention that ever again, I'm going to sue you for infringement of artistic and intellectual property. That's how that's going to work, because you want to make a stupid statement like that. You want to incite violence, and you want to bring this to a head. Go ahead and do that, because it's going to be to your own demise.
And now, look, here's some of the other groups that are involved with Black Lives Matters. Black Left Unity, which is a Marxist-Leninist organization that supports favored causes of the communist left, including unity with Cuba, war against capitalism, and Occupy Wall Street. Black Workers for Justice, a North Carolina-based group which claims to struggle on behalf of oppressed nationalities, etc. Causa Justa, or Just Cause, a Black Latino solidarity organization allied with the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, RTTC, and others. Its 2013 revenues were $1.6 million, including $689,484 in government grants, folks. Then you have Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, which is a national alliance of U.S.-based grassroots organizations, groups organizing to build an agenda for power for working and poor people and communities of color, also a communist front and organization. Hands Up United works for liberation of oppressed Black, brown, and poor people through education, art, civil disobedience, advocacy, and agriculture, which is kind of funny. Intelligent Mischief, their Black Body Survival Guide is in the works and has raised over $8,000 through Indiegogo. Organizations for Black Struggle, Communist Party USA, Revolutionary Student Coordinating Committee, with the group of Hail Satan, which went to the Texas Capitol and started saying Hail Satan in support of the Black Lives Matters group. Folks, you cannot make this type of garbage up. You just can't.
Well, that same group did something, here in Detroit. An atheist organization. They actually had a mock satanic ritual down in Detroit, and again, this falls right in line with everything that we've been saying. What we've opened the show with, the organizations we mentioned, right, as Randy pointed out, they are all interlinked and tied directly to this. Now, this again also, speaks of the entanglement of political correctness with this.
Yeah,
and
with
folks,
the bastardization of tolerance.
Sure. And folks, if you haven't noticed over the past few shows, we've kind of taken the gloves off, because we're sick and damn tired of trying to curb ourselves so that we can be a little bit more. Well, you know what? Farouk that, okay? Because this is what's going to happen. The longer we adhere to any kind of political correctness as a country, the more we're going to have detrimental events, more sporadic supercells of terrorism pop up like Black Lives Matter, and they are terrorists, folks. Anybody that says otherwise is not smart enough to be stupid. That's how that works. Okay? What? That's intolerant. You just say that. No, I'm saying it because it's the freaking truth. And if you don't like it, I don't care.
Yeah. And, you know, it just goes to show that these radical and extreme fringes on the left will do anything to push forward their agenda. Folks, I know it may sound very repetitive of me to keep saying this, but stop and think about it. What have they been doing time and time again over the course of 58 years at least? And actually, it's been a lot longer than that, because the Fabian Socialist movement has its roots back to 1885.
Yeah.
And what you see is that they want to create this veneer of being socially acceptable, of having good manners, so that they can, you know, intermingle themselves within the upper crust of society in order to pollute the minds of the socialites that would otherwise be proactively safeguarding the will of the community. And as we have said on numerous past episodes of the Wright Flyer, we, the people, are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this great representative republic of ours. And what they are doing is actively working to subvert our sovereignty, actively working to subjugate us, to force us onto bended knee so that we accept these Fabian socialist doctrines that have no place in a free and open and honest society like the United States. But we see that, especially under the tutelage of this Barack Hussein Obama regime, these radical, twisted, left-wing ideologues that are hell-bent on the destruction of everything that the United States of America represents and stands for, they have grown more and more and more powerful. And folks, we cannot turn a blind eye to it. This can no longer be live and let live, because they are proactively preaching our deaths. You know, that Shabazz character that Jeremy mentioned just a few minutes ago, that is a prime example of preaching violence, intolerance, and hatred. And that is the backbone of the new left, to use their words against them.
Yeah, and see, that's exactly what needs to happen. They want to have all this propaganda, and I've stated this before. You know, if you go back and look at Joseph Goebbels' principles of propaganda, and you read them for exactly what they are, and I have a clear working understanding of what those words mean, it's a double-edged sword. See, Joseph Goebbels and the Nazis used it for evil purposes. They implemented things with those principles of propaganda in order to do evil things. Why can't we take those same principles of propaganda, turn them on their head, and use them for true purposes, righteous purposes? Because, see, this is what the left fears. They fear individuals like us that have an understanding of them. And we have an understanding of them. Why? Because they're predictable. Why do we know they're predictable? Because we pay attention to history. Randy and I, at our young age, we haven't been on this earth but maybe a blink of an eye compared to many, many individuals that we know.
Mm-hmm.
With Zygmunt Dobbs, over 58 years ago, writing those articles, we happened to come. We only came across those by sheer happenstance, and because of a conversation that Randy had pertaining to Keynes, and we dug into it. So that was actually a good thing.
Yeah.
So we came across it because we like to dig. We like to find things out. Why? Because knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. Okay. And having the values that we have, having the knowledge that we have of our shared constitution, it's the same knowledge that we want all of you to have. This is why we do this. We're not doing this to bolster our egos. We're not doing this to embolden ourselves. Well, maybe a little bit, but no, not really. The thing is, we are sick and damn tired of what is happening to our country, what our country has become. This is not the country that our fathers and grandfathers and family before them, our founding fathers, had envisioned for us. It is time that we re-examine that vision that our founding fathers had and put it back into practice. And the only way to do that is to arm yourselves with the knowledge. See, these individuals that want, to talk about us, saying, "Oh, you guys are extremists." No, we're Americans. We're patriots. We're citizens first and foremost. Oh, well, you cling to your guns and your Bibles. Yes, we have guns. We have lots of guns. We have
Bibles too.
We don't care, and we have Bibles too. Those are just a couple of the tools that we have in our toolbox. Okay? It's not about having physical arms per se, because they want people to believe that, oh, well, they're armed. They have assault weapons. And this, yes, I do. I have a metal-edged ruler that can actually be quite effective if need be.
I have a salt shaker that's an assault weapon. Does that count?
Absolutely. What scares them more, and again, this is the propaganda they want to put out. Mm-hmm. What scares them more is not the fact that we have guns or Bibles or weapons. It's that we have knowledge, because knowledge is the ultimate power. And when we have the knowledge to understand and predict what they're going to do, that scares the living hell out of them. And I'm glad that it does. I want them to be shaken to their core. I want their shadows to just evaporate because they're shaking so bad.
Yeah. And, let's go back to a message from Archibald Roosevelt in closing here. And he says, "The watchword of our republic should be tolerance. We should try to understand our fellow citizens' strengths and weaknesses as well as our own, and make allowance therefore. We should accept our fellow citizen to do likewise. When dealing with us, we should thank God that a great power has allowed humanity to develop races able to adapt themselves to changing conditions, so that humanity is not today as extinct as the Tyrannosaurus Rex." That is an all-powerful message, ladies and gentlemen. And with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendants back for one last round of alcohol. As always, folks, I'm your Captain, Randy Wright, and am joined by my First Officer, Jeremy Grapington. We invite you to leave posts, comments, concerns, either here at our YouTube page or at our Facebook page or our Google Plus page. Thank you for flying the Wright Flyer, ladies and gentlemen. We hope to see you again next time when we fly over the friendly airwaves, leaving you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, as we always do. Thank you again, and see you next time.